Welcome to Willow's World of DIY. I'm Willow, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace the passenger side front axle seal on this GMC Sierra 2500 HD. Let's get to it. I started off by removing the skid plates, and now I'm jacking up the front of the truck. I put my jack stand on the frame rail, as you can see here. Now I'm removing the bolts that hold the CV axle to the axle, and I use a rock and wedge it underneath my tire so I can keep it from spinning while I'm trying to loosen these, and then I just move the rock, turn the tire, put the rock back into it. Here's a look at the axle. You can see that the seal's leaking with all the oil all around it. And I'm gonna have to remove this whole axle tube to replace it. Now I'm just connecting the electrical connection. I just press the clip with my finger and pull it out. And then I remove the bolts that hold the axle tube to the differential. You want to make sure that you have an oil catch pan ready, because this thing's starting to leak some oil. Now I'm separating the CV axle from the axle, and I just let it hang down. Now you have to remove these two nuts that hold the axle tube to the mounting bracket. I can't get the axle tube all the way out, so I need to loosen up the mount. The bolts run all the way through the frame rail. So there's one in front of the tire and one behind the tire. Just got to loosen those. Now that I have the mount loose, there's enough play in it that I can remove the axle tube. There's an electrical wire hold down on the top of the axle tube that you need to disconnect to get it out. There's a flat washer that usually falls down that you need to look out for. And it goes right here. I put the axle tube in my vise so I can disassemble it and keep track of the parts. And I pulled out the engagement gear, shift fork, and the valve all together in one piece. And now I'm trying to get the axle out. Sometimes you can beat it out with a hammer. There's a clip ring around the bottom that if you can't get it out with a hammer, you got to use some clip ring pliers. and then I wedge it up. Once I get it up on one side, then I wedge it all the way up around it with the flathead screwdriver, and now you can tap out the axle. This is a look at that clip ring that you have to remove, and now I'm just cleaning up the axle and inspecting the wear points to make sure there's no excessive wear. And then I remove the 2 washers at the bottom and wipe down everything, clean it all up. And now I flip it over and put it back in the vise so I can remove the seal. I'm just using a crowbar, and try not to jam it in too much to, scar up the sides or anything. I'm just grabbing in on the seal itself. Here's a look at the old seal. You can see a small break in it, and that's where our leak was coming from. Now I'm inspecting the bearing, and I'm just making sure everything's rolling nicely and that there's nothing jamming it up or any debris in it. This is the new axle seal. I just ordered it on Amazon, and I'm pulling it out and inspecting it and comparing it with the old one. Make sure it's the right one. I tap the seal into place with a hammer just to get it started, and then I use a piece of wood as a cushion to drive it all the way in. I use a softwood like pine for this, just so it doesn't damage the seal, and it'll just indent on the wood. Then I clean it up and inspect it and make sure that the seal is all the way in. And then I put a thin layer of waterproof grease on the inside of the seal. And now I pull it out of the vise and flip it so we can put it all back together. I put a thin layer of waterproof grease on the axle where the bearing rides and where the seal rides, just to get it to slip in a little nicer. I clean everything off before reinstalling it. First thing you install back in is this eared flat washer. The ears on the flat washer go into the grooves on the axle tube. And then I install the flat washer. There's a beveled edge on the inside. You want to make sure that that beveled edge goes up. Now I'm installing the axle. And then I install the clip ring. And you want to make sure that that clip ring is set all the way down into the groove on the axle where it needs to go. Now I'm cleaning up the mating surface really well. You want to make sure that this is nice and clean so your sealant will make a good seal. Now I can reinstall the engagement gear, shift fork, and valve all together. And I'm just wiping it down and cleaning it up. And then I install the last flat washer. I'm using Loctite 518 gasket maker. It's an anaerobic sealant, and I put a bead of it all the way around the mating surface. And this is a look at it. Here you can see that the bead goes all the way around on the mating surface, so it'll make a good seal. And I'm using Loctite Clean and Prime. This is an activator, and I spray it on the opposing mating surface. In our case, that's the differential. And now I'm installing the axle tube to the differential. You want to go fairly quickly because that activator will start to harden the sealant. So you want to get it in place and pressed in, within like 3 minutes probably. Now that I have all the bolts that hold the axle tube to the differential installed and snugged up, I can install the two 21mm nuts that hold the axle tube to the mount. And I don't tighten these all the way down until I tighten down the mounting bolts that tighten the mount to the frame. Now I'm reinstalling the CV axle to the axle and putting all those bolts back in. And then I snug them all back up. Now I'm reconnecting the electrical wire hold down, and then I plug the connection back in. Now I'm removing the drain plug and the fill port, and I let all the old gear oil drain out. My helper Miss B is in the background inspecting, making sure everything's looking good. Now I reinstall the drain plug and tighten it up so we can add in some more gear oil. And I'm using a fluid transfer pump to transfer it from the bottle into the front differential. You know when the front differential is full because the oil will come back out of the fill hole. And then I reinstall the fill port plug. I always inspect the bottom of my drain pan for any metal shavings. In this you can see some really fine ones, but when I touch them with my finger, it's not enough where I can even feel it between my fingers. Now we're going to torque all of our nuts and bolts with a torque wrench. I'm starting with the 21mm socket, and I got my torque wrench set to 75 foot-pounds. And I'm going to torque the two 21mm nuts that hold the mounting bracket to the frame. So one's in front of the tire and one's in the back of the tire. And then I torque these two 21mm nuts to 75 foot-pounds as well. Now I'm using a 15mm socket, and I have my torque wrench set to 30 foot-pounds. And now I'm going to torque all the bolts that hold the axle tube to the differential to 30 foot-pounds. Now I'm using a 15mm socket, and I have my torque wrench set to 58 foot-pounds. And now I'm going to torque all the bolts that hold the CV axle to the axle to 58 foot-pounds. Now I'm using a 13mm socket, And I have my torque wrench set to 24 foot-pounds. And I torque the drain plug to 24 foot-pounds. Now I'm using a 15mm socket, and I still have my torque wrench set at 24 foot-pounds. And I torque the field port plug to 24 foot-pounds. I hope you found this video helpful. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching Willow's World of DIY. Until next time.